The fluorescent lights of the downtown conference room felt like tiny daggers stabbing into Jasmine Harper's skull. She gripped the edge of the presentation podium, forcing her brightest smile as 12 pairs of eyes studied her from across the mahogany table. These investors held the future of her tech company in their perfectly manicured hands, and she refused to show weakness. Not today. Not when everything she had worked for hung in the balance. Her smartphone app, designed to revolutionize mental health accessibility, needed this funding round. 3 years of 18-hour days, countless sacrifices, and one crumbling marriage had led to this moment. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible mountain. Behind the investors, leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed, stood Derek Sullivan. Her husband of 5 years looked like a stranger in his expensive charcoal suit, his jaw tight with an expression she could not quite read anymore. He had insisted on coming today, though they had barely spoken more than necessary in weeks. The divorce papers sat unsigned on their kitchen counter, a silent threat neither had been willing to execute yet. Jasmine clicked to the next slide, her vision blurring slightly at the edges. She blinked hard, pushing through the sudden wave of dizziness that threatened to knock her off balance. This had been happening more frequently lately, these moments where her body seemed to betray her ambition. She attributed it to stress, lack of sleep, too much coffee, and not enough real food. Every entrepreneur paid a price for success. The lead investor, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Holmes, leaned forward with interest. Your user retention rates are impressive, but what makes you different from the 7 other mental health apps that launched this quarter? Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone who had heard 1,000 pitches and funded maybe 10. Jasmine opened her mouth to respond with the answer. She had rehearsed 100 times. Instead, the room tilted sideways. The faces before her swam together like watercolors in the rain. She felt her knees buckle, heard someone shout her name. Derek's voice cutting through the fog with panic. She had not heard from him in months. The floor rushed up to meet her. But she never felt the impact. Strong arms caught her mid-fall, and she smelled the familiar cologne that used to comfort her on difficult nights. Derek's face appeared above hers, his green eyes wide with terror that seemed disproportionate to a simple fainting spell. "Call an ambulance," he barked at someone, his voice raw. His hand cradled her head with a gentleness that felt foreign after months of careful distance and cold politeness. "Jasmine, stay with me." "Can you hear me?" She wanted to tell him she was fine, that she just needed a moment, that this deal was too important to ruin. But her tongue felt thick and uncooperative. The edges of her vision darkened like someone was slowly turning down the lights on her consciousness. The conference room erupted into controlled chaos. Someone brought water. Patricia Holmes spoke rapidly on her phone. Nina Chen, Jasmine's business partner and best friend since college, appeared beside Derek, her face pale with worry. But all Jasmine could focus on was Derek's hand gripping hers, like she was the only solid thing left in a world turned liquid. "I have got you," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. "I have got you, Jazz." It was the nickname he had not used since their wedding day, when he had whispered it against her lips during their first dance. Back when his eyes held promises of forever, before career ambitions on both sides had carved a canyon between them too wide to cross. Back when coming home to each other felt like the best part of every day. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics swarmed with practiced efficiency. Asking questions, Derek answered because Jasmine's voice had abandoned her entirely. Blood pressure low. Heart rate elevated. Possible dehydration or exhaustion. The medical terms floated around her like leaves in a stream. She caught Nina's eye as they loaded her onto the stretcher. "The presentation," Jasmine croaked out, her first word since falling. "Forget the presentation," Nina said firmly, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "You are more important than any investment deal. We will figure it out." But Derek never left her side. He climbed into the ambulance without hesitation, still holding her hand like releasing it might cause her to disappear. During the ride to the hospital, Jasmine studied his face through the haze of her confusion. When had the lines around his eyes become so deep? When had the weight of unhappiness settled so permanently on his shoulders? When had they stopped really seeing each other? The emergency room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Nurses moved with quiet competence, hooking her up to machines that beeped rhythmically. Derek paced at the foot of her bed, running his hands through his dark hair until it stood up in disheveled spikes. He looked nothing like the composed investment banker who negotiated million-dollar deals before lunch. A doctor entered, a kind-faced woman in her 40s with warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her name tag read Dr. Rebecca Walsh. She carried a tablet and wore the expression of someone about to deliver news that would change lives irrevocably. "We ran a full panel of tests," Dr. Walsh began, her voice gentle but direct. "Your blood work shows severe anemia, which explains the fainting. You have been ignoring symptoms for a while, I would guess. The exhaustion, the dizziness, maybe some shortness of breath?" Jasmine nodded slowly, shame creeping up her neck. She had ignored all of it, focused on her company's launch, to pay attention to her body's desperate signals. The doctor's expression softened further. "There is something else, Jasmine. Something you need to know." She glanced at Derek, then back to Jasmine. "You are pregnant." About 9 weeks along, based on the hormone levels, the words hung in the air like smoke. It's impossible to grasp, but undeniably present. Pregnant. The room seemed to stop spinning, the universe holding its breath. Jasmine's hand flew to her stomach, flat beneath the thin hospital gown. 9 weeks ago, she and Derek had attended a mutual friend's wedding. They had danced together for the first time in months, shared a hotel room. Let champagne and nostalgia blur the sharp edges of their distance. One night when grief for what they were losing had transformed into desperate connection, the next morning, Derek had gone back to sleeping in the guest room. She had thrown herself even harder into work. Neither had mentioned it again. Derek stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. He moved to her bedside slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. But Dr. Walsh was not finished. "There's one more thing you both need to understand. The anemia is severe enough that this pregnancy is considered high risk. Jasmine, you've been running yourself into the ground, and your body cannot sustain both you and a baby at this rate." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "You need complete rest, proper nutrition, and significantly less stress. This means stepping back from work for a while. This means accepting help. This means putting yourself and this baby first." Jasmine felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. Her company was in the middle of its most critical phase. Investors were waiting. Her team depended on her. How could she possibly step away now? Derek's hand found hers again, and this time she held on tight. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture so familiar it hurt. When she finally looked up at him, she saw tears in his eyes too. The first she had witnessed since his father's funeral 3 years ago. "We are going to figure this out," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever it takes, Jazz. We will figure it out together." But the question that neither dared speak aloud hung between them like a ghost. Together meant they still had something worth saving. Together meant choosing each other over the ambitions that had driven them apart. Together meant risking everything on a marriage that had been dying slowly for 2 years. Could one unexpected pregnancy really heal wounds that deep? Or would it simply trap them both in a relationship that had already breathed its last breath? Saturday morning found Dante in an unusual place for a man of his schedule and status. The downtown farmers market wasn't somewhere he typically visited, preferring to have his private chefs source ingredients directly from vendors. But Bruno had insisted he needed to get out, breathe fresh air, remember what normal life felt like. Against his better judgment, Dante had agreed, if only to get his friend to stop worrying. The market buzzed with life. Families wandering between stalls of fresh produce, street musicians playing for spare change, the smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee mixing in the autumn air. Dante walked through it all feeling disconnected, like watching a movie about other people's lives. Everyone seemed so carefree, so unguarded, laughing and touching and trusting. He envied them and pitied them in equal measure. He was examining some heirloom tomatoes at a vendor's stall, not really seeing them, when someone crashed into him from behind with considerable force. The impact sent him stumbling forward, and he heard a crash. The sound of equipment hitting pavement, followed by a very creative string of cursing in both English and what sounded like Portuguese. Dante turned to find a young woman on her knees, frantically checking over a professional camera and several lenses that had spilled from her bag. Her long dark hair fell across her face as she examined each piece of equipment with the concentration of a surgeon checking for injuries. She wore paint-splattered jeans, an oversized sweater, and sneakers that had definitely seen better days. Everything about her was the opposite of the polished, designer-clad women Dante usually encountered. "I am so sorry," Dante said automatically, bending down to help gather the scattered lens caps and filters. "I should have been paying attention to where I was standing." The woman looked up, and Dante found himself staring into the warmest brown eyes he had ever seen. They were expressive and lively, currently filled with concern for her equipment. When she realized he was apologizing, those eyes crinkled with amusement. "Are you kidding? That was totally my fault. I was walking backwards trying to frame a shot and not watching where I was going. Story of my life, honestly." She laughed, a sound so genuine and unself-conscious that Dante felt something stir in his chest, some long dormant response to simple joy. "Is your camera okay?" he asked, helping her stand. She checked it over carefully, clicked the shutter a few times, examined the lens. "Seems like it survived my clumsiness. Thank goodness, because this baby cost me 6 months of ramen dinners." She grinned at him, completely at ease. "I'm Nina, by the way. Nina Alvarez, professional klutz, an amateur photographer. Or maybe it's the other way around, I can never remember." "Dante," he said, shaking her extended hand. Her grip was firm, her palm slightly calloused. These were hands that worked, that created. "What were you photographing?" Nina's face lit up like someone had turned on a switch inside her. "Oh, I'm doing this photo essay project about family food traditions. You know, like documenting the stories behind what people cook and why it matters to them. This market is perfect because everyone here has a story." She gestured around them with infectious enthusiasm. "See that woman over there selling empanadas? Her grandmother's recipe from Colombia. And that guy with the pasta? His family has been making it the same way for 4 generations in Italy." Dante found himself listening, really listening, in a way he hadn't done in months. There was something captivating about the way Nina talked about people, about stories, about the meaning behind simple things like food and family. It reminded him of why he had fallen in love with cooking in restaurants in the first place. Before it became about profit margins and expansion strategies. "That sounds like a beautiful project," he said, and meant it. "Thanks. I know it won't make me rich or famous or anything, but that's not really the point, you know?" Nina adjusted her camera strap. "The point is preserving these stories. Showing that the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you can put a price tag on." The words hit Dante harder than she could have known. Here was someone who genuinely believed that some things mattered more than money, more than status. He had forgotten people like this existed. "Do you need help with your project?" The words came out before Dante could stop them. "I mean, if you need locations or access to people with food stories, I might be able to help." Nina studied him for a moment, her head tilted slightly. "That's really nice of you, random stranger, whose name I already forgot because I'm terrible with names." "Dante," he repeated, smiling despite himself. "Right, Dante, like the poet. That's actually a great memory trick, thanks." She pulled out her phone. "Tell you what, give me your number, and maybe I can take you up on that offer. I'm actually looking for a restaurant to feature in my next chapter. Somewhere with real character and history. Not just trendy decor." They exchanged numbers. Dante felt something he hadn't felt in 3 months. Curiosity about another person, interest in seeing them again. It terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Nina didn't look at him with dollar signs in her eyes or calculating interest. She looked at him like he was just another person at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning, which was exactly what he was. "I actually own a few restaurants," Dante said carefully, watching her face for any change. "One of them has been in the same location for 40 years. The head chef learned from his mentor, who learned from his grandmother. Lots of stories there. Seriously. That sounds perfect." Nina's enthusiasm was undiminished, not increased or changed by the revelation of his profession. Which restaurant? Sapori? It's downtown, near the theater district. I think I've walked past it. The one with the green awning and the flower boxes? When Dante nodded, she continued, Never been inside, though. I'm more of a food truck budget kind of girl. She said it without shame or apology. Just a statement of fact. How about this? Dante heard himself saying, Come by Monday evening around 4, before the dinner rush. You can talk to the staff, photograph whatever you want, hear the stories. No charge, just for your project. Nina's smile could have powered the entire city. Really? That would be amazing? Are you sure? I'm sure. And he was surprisingly sure. More certain of this than anything he had decided in months. They talked for another 20 minutes, standing there in the middle of the farmer's market while people flowed around them. Nina told him about growing up in a big Brazilian family where every gathering centered around food and loud conversations. Dante found himself sharing memories of his own childhood. His mother's kitchen where she made everything from scratch because restaurants were too expensive. How he learned to cook by watching her transform simple ingredients into magic. When they finally parted ways, Dante walked back to his car feeling strange, lighter somehow. Like something heavy he had been carrying had loosened its grip slightly. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at Nina's name in his phone contacts, wondering what he was doing, wondering if he was making a terrible mistake. That night, for the first time in 3 months, Dante didn't work until midnight. He went home at a reasonable hour, cooked himself a simple dinner of pasta with olive oil and garlic,
and sat by the window watching the city lights.
Tomorrow was Sunday, then Monday would come. And Nina would walk into his restaurant with her camera and her genuine smile and her belief that stories mattered more than money. Dante wasn't sure if he was ready to trust again, wasn't sure if he would ever be ready. But as he sat there in the quiet of his apartment, he realized that Nina hadn't asked anything of him. She hadn't wanted connections or favors or access to his world. She had just wanted to document a story, to capture something real and beautiful. Maybe, it's just maybe, there were still people in the world who saw value in things that couldn't be bought. Maybe not everyone was like Camila. The thought was terrifying because believing it meant risking being wrong again, risking the pain that came with misplaced trust. But it was also the first spark of hope Dante had felt since that terrible night 3 months ago. He picked up his phone and typed out a message to Nina. He's looking forward to Monday. Come hungry, I'll have the chef prepare something special. Her response came almost immediately. You don't have to do that. But I definitely won't say no to free food. See you Monday. Dante the poet who owns restaurants. He smiled at his phone screen, actually smiled, and the expression felt foreign on his face after so long. Bruno would be pleased to see this small crack in the walls Dante had built. Gloria would probably cry and thank the saints. But Dante kept this moment to himself. This tiny seed of possibility that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. Monday couldn't come fast enough. And that fact alone should have worried him more than it did. We both made mistakes, Derek said, covering her hand with his. But Jazz, we have a chance now. A terrifying, unexpected, complicated chance. This baby did not ask to be born into our mess, but maybe this baby is exactly what we need to remember what matters. Dr. Walsh returned with a nurse, carrying pamphlets and prescription bottles. The next hour was spent discussing prenatal care, dietary restrictions, activity limitations, and follow-up appointments. Jasmine learned she would need weekly monitoring due to the anemia, daily iron supplements, and strict bed rest for at least 2 weeks. Her blood pressure was too high, her stress levels dangerous for both her and the developing baby. You mentioned you run a tech startup, Dr. Walsh said, looking at Jasmine seriously. That needs to stop immediately. No work emails, no investor calls, no emergency meetings. Your body is already compromised, and adding a pregnancy to that is like asking a car with a damaged engine to win a race. Something will give, and I will not let that something be your health or this baby's life. The words were harsh, but necessary. Jasmine nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling over her. She had spent 3 years building her company, but now she had to build something more important. She had to rebuild her health, her marriage, prepare to bring a new life into the world. Derek scheduled the first ultrasound for the following week, marking it in his phone calendar with a priority flag. As the medical staff filed out, leaving them alone again, he pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Gregory, it is Derek Sullivan," he said into the phone. "I need to request a leave of absence starting immediately. Family emergency." "Yes, I understand the Henderson deal is closing next week. Hand it to Patterson. This is more important." Jasmine watched him sacrifice the career advancement he had been working toward for months, making the choice she had never been able to make. He hung up and met her eyes. "We do this together," he said simply. Really together this time. For the first time since collapsing in that conference room, Jasmine felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The road ahead would not be easy. They had months of hard conversations, therapy sessions, and trust building ahead of them. But they also had something they had not had in years, a shared purpose and the willingness to fight for it. The evening sun painted the hospital room in shades of gold and amber as they sat together. Hands intertwined, talking about everything they had been too afraid to say for 2 years. They talked about his father's emotional distance and how it shaped his fear of abandonment. They talked about her father's bankruptcy and how it fueled her desperate need for financial security. They talked about the dreams they had when they first fell in love, and how somewhere along the way, those dreams had been buried under ambition and fear, and for the first time in longer than either could remember. They talked about the future not as separate individuals, but as partners facing it together. 2 weeks had passed since the collapse. 2 weeks of mandatory bed rest that had felt like a prison sentence for someone as driven as Jasmine. But it had also been 2 weeks of Derek coming home every evening with groceries, cooking meals she actually enjoyed, sitting beside her on the couch watching movies they had been too busy to see. 2 weeks of slowly remembering why they had fallen in love in the first place. The morning of their first ultrasound appointment arrived with nervous anticipation. Derek had taken the entire day off work, something he had not done in over a year. He helped Jasmine into the car with a gentleness that made her feel precious rather than fragile, his hand steady on her elbow as she navigated the steps from their apartment building. The waiting room at the obstetrics clinic was filled with expectant couples in various stages of pregnancy. Some women had prominent baby bumps. Others looked like Jasmine, no visible evidence yet of the life growing inside. She noticed how the partners held hands, how they exchanged excited glances, and felt a pang of sadness that she and Derek had missed the joy of planning this pregnancy together, as if reading her thoughts. Derek squeezed her hand. "We are here now," he said quietly. "That is what matters." The ultrasound technician, cheerful woman named Patricia, led them into a dimly lit room dominated by medical equipment. Jasmine lay back on the examination table, Derek pulling a chair close beside her. When Patricia applied the cold gel to her still flat abdomen, Jasmine grabbed Derek's hand instinctively. The technician moved the probe across her stomach, eyes focused on the screen. For a moment that felt like eternity, there was only the sound of the machine humming. Then suddenly, a rhythmic whooshing filled the room, fast and strong like a tiny galloping horse. "That is your baby's heartbeat," Patricia said with a warm smile. "Nice and strong at 152 beats per minute." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the grainy black and white image on the screen. There, in the center, was a tiny bean-shaped form with a flickering white spot at its core. Their baby, real and alive and fighting to grow despite her mother's neglect of her own health. Derek made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His hand tightened around hers as he leaned forward, mesmerized by the image. "That is ours," he whispered, awe saturating every word. "That is our baby." Patricia took measurements, explaining each calculation. "Everything looks good for 11 weeks now. Baby is measuring right on track." She pointed to different features on the screen. "This is the head. These little bumps will become arms and legs. You can even see movement if you watch closely." They watched in silence as the tiny form shifted slightly. Practicing movements it would not be able to feel for weeks yet. Jasmine had built a company from nothing, negotiated deals worth millions, stood in front of demanding investors without flinching. But nothing in her life had prepared her for the overwhelming love that crashed over her seeing this small collection of cells that was somehow already a person. "I am sorry," she whispered to the screen, to the baby, to the future she had almost destroyed through neglect. "I am so sorry I did not take better care of us." "Hey," Derek said, using his free hand to gently turn her face toward him. "No more apologies. We move forward from here." He looked back at the screen. "We protect this little one together." Patricia printed several copies of the ultrasound images, handing them over with instructions for the next appointment. As they walked back to the car, Derek kept one arm around Jasmine's waist, protective and present in a way he had not been in years. She tucked the ultrasound pictures carefully into her purse, already planning where she would put them at home. That evening, they sat together on their apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The city stretched out below them, alive with evening traffic and distant sounds of urban life. Derek had made dinner, a simple pasta dish that Jasmine had actually finished without feeling nauseous. "Progress," Nina called, just as they were clearing plates. She had been managing the company beautifully, sending brief updates that never pressured Jasmine to return but kept her informed. The investors from the day of the collapse had decided to move forward with funding despite the interrupted pitch. Apparently, Jasmine's dedication to her work, even to the point of collapse, had impressed them more than any presentation could have. "But here's the thing," Nina said over speakerphone. "I told them you would not be returning full-time for at least 6 months. I structured the deal so I take on the CEO role temporarily while you transition to a board advisor position. Your health and that baby come first, Jazz. The company will be here when you are ready." Jasmine felt tears threatening again, the pregnancy hormones making her emotional about everything. "Thank you for protecting me from myself," she said quietly. "I should have listened to you months ago." "You are listening now," Nina replied. "That is what counts. Now go take care of yourself and that baby. And Derek, if you are there, take care of them both." After they hung up, Derek pulled Jasmine into his arms on the couch. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. This moment of peace felt foreign after years of constant motion and hustle. But it also felt right in a way nothing had felt right in a long time. Over the following weeks, they started couples therapy with Dr. Catherine Webb, a specialist in relationship repair. The sessions were difficult, forcing them to confront patterns they had fallen into and hurt they had caused each other. Derek admitted his tendency to withdraw when feeling vulnerable, a coping mechanism learned from watching his emotionally distant father. Jasmine acknowledged her habit of using work as armor against intimacy, terrified of depending on someone after seeing her own father broken by loss. But they also laughed during sessions, remembering inside jokes they had forgotten and the quirks that had once endeared them to each other. They learned new communication tools, practiced active listening, and slowly began rebuilding trust that had eroded over time. Dr. Webb assigned homework, simple exercises like sharing 3 things they appreciated about each other daily, or spending 15 minutes of phone-free time together each evening. Derek accompanied Jasmine to every doctor's appointment, learning about iron levels and blood pressure readings and fetal development milestones. He bought pregnancy books and read them cover to cover, asking questions that made even the medical staff smile at his enthusiasm. When Jasmine's anemia slowly improved with treatment and rest, they celebrated with a decaf latte and a walk through the park where he had proposed 5 years earlier. One evening, about 3 months after the collapse, Derek came home with a shopping bag. He pulled out a small notebook with a leather cover and handed it to Jasmine. "What is this?" she asked, running her fingers over the soft leather. "A journal," he said, sitting beside her on the couch. "I know you have been struggling with not working, with feeling like you lost your identity when you stepped back from the company. My therapist suggested writing might help. You could write to the baby about this journey, about us rebuilding. Something to look back on." Jasmine opened the first blank page, her throat tight with emotion. She had once filled notebooks with business plans and user experience sketches. The idea of filling one with personal thoughts, with feelings instead of strategies, felt both terrifying and liberating. That night, she wrote her first entry. A letter to the baby about the day she saw their heartbeat for the first time. About the father who had already shown more devotion in 3 months than she had thought possible. About the second chance she had been given and her determination not to waste it. Derek started a similar practice, though he shared his entries with Jasmine. He wrote about his fears of repeating his father's mistakes, about his hope that they could break the cycle of emotional unavailability that had plagued his family, about watching his wife slowly come back to life as she learned to value rest and connection over constant productivity, as Jasmine's body grew rounder with pregnancy. Their relationship deepened. They took childbirth preparation classes where Derek practiced breathing techniques with ridiculous seriousness, making her laugh until her sides hurt. They painted the spare bedroom a soft sage green, transforming Derek's former exile into a nursery filled with hope. They interviewed pediatricians together, arguing good-naturedly about philosophies and approaches. On their 6th wedding anniversary, Derek surprised her with dinner at the restaurant where they had their first date. Jasmine wore a maternity dress that accommodated her 20-week baby bump, feeling more beautiful than she had in years. Over dessert, Derek pulled out a small box. "I know we never really took our wedding rings off through all of this," he said, his voice soft. "But I wanted to give you something that represents who we are now, not just who we were when we got married." Inside the box were 2 thin bands, rose gold intertwined with silver. He had them engraved, Jasmine's with words that made her cry, "Rebuilt stronger." His simply said, "Always fighting for us." They renewed their private commitment to each other that night. Not with grand gestures or public ceremony, but with quiet promises made over candlelight. Promises to communicate even when it was hard. Promises to prioritize their relationship even when work beckoned. Promises to be the parents their baby deserved and the partners they had once dreamed of becoming. 6 months after the collapse that had upended everything, Jasmine woke at 3 in the morning to her water breaking. Derek moved with calm efficiency, grabbing the hospital bag they had packed weeks ago, helping her into the car, calling Dr. Walsh to alert her they were coming. But she noticed his hands shaking slightly as he drove, the nervous energy barely contained beneath his composed exterior. Labor was long and exhausting. 18 hours that tested every ounce of strength Jasmine had. Derek never left her side, breathing with her through contractions, rubbing her back, whispering encouragement when she insisted she could not continue. He held her hand so tightly during the final pushes that his knuckles turned white, and when their daughter finally emerged with a powerful cry that filled the delivery room, tears streamed freely down his face. The nurse placed the baby girl on Jasmine's chest, a warm weight that instantly became the center of her universe. Derek leaned in close, one arm around Jasmine, one hand gently touching their daughter's tiny fingers. She was perfect, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced her displeasure at being removed from her warm cocoon. "She is beautiful," Derek breathed, his voice thick with wonder. "She looks just like you. She has your stubbornness," Jasmine said with an exhausted laugh, watching their daughter's face scrunch up in indignation. Look at that determination. They had chosen the name together during one of their evening balcony conversations, wanting something that meant new beginnings. Grace Alina Sullivan entered the world at 9:23 in the morning, weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces, and immediately wrapping both her parents around her tiny fingers as the medical team worked around them and Grace settled into her first feeding. Derek kissed Jasmine's forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for this perfect gift." Jasmine looked up at him, at the man who had fought his way back to her when it would have been easier to walk away. "We did this together," she said. "Every hard conversation, every therapy session, every moment of choosing us over everything else. We built this, and they had. Not a perfect fairy tale with easy answers, but something real and hard-won. A marriage rebuilt from ruins, stronger for having been broken and carefully pieced back together. A family born from crisis and nurtured through commitment and work and love that refused to quit." As Grace's eyes fluttered open for the first time, deep blue and unfocused, both parents leaned in close. "Welcome to the world, little one," Derek said softly. "We promise to show up for you, to love you fiercely, and to keep choosing each other every single day, outside the hospital window, The sun rose over the city, painting everything in shades of gold. A new day, a new chapter, a new beginning built on the foundation of everything they had learned from falling apart. And in that moment, holding their daughter between them, Jasmine and Derek knew that some things were worth the fight. Some things were worth rebuilding, no matter how shattered they seemed. Some things were worth believing in, even when hope felt impossible. Their story had not ended with collapse and shocking news. It had simply found a different path. One that led them through darkness and back into light, forever changed but infinitely stronger for the journey.